The expression justice delayed is justice denied has almost become a cliche. But this case is a living example of that. By the time of Bloody Sunday, Soldier F was on a second tour of Northern Ireland. He had been promoted and knew he was licensed to use whatever violence he liked. He was specially protected by an unlawful agreement between the British Army and the RUC signed off at the highest level. This agreement was in response to local and international concern about the growing numbers of incidents in which unarmed civilians were being shot dead with increasing regularity by the British Army and how the police should be reacting. Soldier F too has benefited greatly from this agreement. None of his RMP statements are admissible to this court, as is the case with his Treasury Solicitor's statement when he radically rearranged his 13 shots and belatedly admitted killing another 4 victims because his bullet was found in Michael Kelly's spine. As with his sworn oral evidence to Widgery and to the Bloody Sunday inquiry, when he then claimed to know he fired his weapon that day, but he claimed not to recall when, where or why he fired it. Many key witnesses to his behaviour and brutality have passed away. The forensic evidence is gone, including the bullet that killed Michael Kelly, which was lost, his rifle, which was sold off by the Ministry of Defence at the commencement of the Savile inquiry. He faces a sliver of the evidence that once was available and stands trial only for his victims within Glenfarra Park, and is charged with murdering less than half of the men and boys he killed. Nonetheless, this case is as close to accountability as we have been able to achieve.
Nicola, how do I welcome you to your own podcast?
What are we doing here? Yeah. We actually sort of decided that we'd just go for it, didn't we? Because it's, I'm in the north. I'm in our northern offices and I'm in your podcast studio at the Bell Tell. But we're probably gonna put this out on both platforms, the Bell Tell and Crime World.
That's the plan?
Yeah.
This is, Crime World, even the Bell Tell. This is a very unusual case because Bloody Sunday was 53 years ago. There's been 2 major investigations tribunals, one of which the Widgery findings were thrown out as nonsense. There's been so many articles, there's so many documentaries. We've had Savile. I mean, what left is there to find out? So, that's the question that the public will be asking. What is this all about?
Well, this is about putting Soldier F, as he's known, into the dock. And he's been tried for 2 murders, those of James Ray and Willie McKinney. And we heard today at the opening of the case that they were essentially shot as they sort of, in the backs, they were shot from behind. And he's also being charged with the attempted murder of 5 other people. So there isn't much to know. It is quite weird because we know everything. Even the opening of a trial is usually, there's reveals, isn't there? There's what is the case against this person. But there wasn't reveals because there's been so much investigation into Bloody Sunday that we know exactly what happens. It will be up to the prosecution to prove that Soldier F is guilty of murder. And that's beyond reasonable doubt, obviously. And it's in front of a judge, a diplock case, you call it up here. It would essentially be similar to our special criminal court, except you've just one judge sitting. So that's it. Soldier F is in the dock. Now, weirdly, in a kind of a curtain, actually not unlike this podcast studio we're in. He's sitting in the middle of the courtroom, surrounded by black curtains. You can't see him.
And Soldier F, that phraseology, which we're so used to now. But you just need to Google and you'll find out who Soldier F is, because Colm Eastwood stood up in the House of Commons and named him. So we can't name him because of legal reasons. But we often question sometimes in the modern world how that can get quite farcical, and it is slightly farcical at this stage in this case, but nevertheless, that's not up to us. That's not our call.
Yeah, it is a bit, because you don't have to go too deep into the bowels of the internet to find who he is. I don't believe there's any up-to-date photographs of him, however. So in that way, you can, in the internet, not going to direct anyone to it, but you can see a photograph of him when he was a young paratrooper in his 20s. I've no doubt he's changed a lot. He's in his 70s now. And the court, in actual fact, has told that he is in some sort of ill health, that he needs these comfort breaks, and that they need to happen kind of sporadically during the evidence. This morning it was mobbed, and we were waiting a long time to go into the courtroom. Presumably they were trying to set up this curtain situation, and we were only starting really at about 11, and the next thing there was one of these comfort breaks at 12, so everyone spills back out and everyone goes back in again. If this trial continues, they're going to have to be a little bit more efficient with that, I think.
As you say, we can't predict, and it's not for us to try and predict what the defence case will be or the prosecution case will be. But we just point out to the listener that in this case, that as far as humanly possible at this stage, or in the recent past, that the facts of Bloody Sunday were forensically analysed as far as they possibly could be, then that has been done. So those facts, they're there to be read. You can go online and read what the Savile inquiry found about Bloody Sunday. So I think that's a great mystery for people who are listening, because it's a great mystery to me as well. I know we're having a wee chat beforehand, like, how could they possibly defend this? How could they possibly prosecute this? Because it's so long ago.
Well, I suppose, so what's happening is, so today we got the opening, which was the prosecution laid out their case, right? Now I have reams of notes, but I'll just explain it to you in as clear and concise as I can. They have photographs that they've presented to the judge, and they will show where people were when this sort of shooting began. They have statements from people which are going to be read into the court over the coming days, which will kind of set the scene. Because, of course, this was a civil rights march that came in the aftermath of internment, and 20,000 people, I think, attended it. But the paratroopers came in, and the case against Soldier F is he's one of those that shot at unarmed civilians, and would later claim, in a series of statements, a number of the soldiers made, claiming that they were armed, which they weren't. And really, I think that's what the Savile inquiry cleared the name of these people, that they weren't fighting back. They were just ordinary people, out on the civil right. And in actual fact, when you hear the detail of it today, and they're running for their lives because they know the paratroopers are coming, the soldiers are coming. They're talking, people hear these kind of comments going around, and you can get a sense of the panic as they come into this sort of cordoned area in Glenfadda Park. Have you been up in Derry at the museum? And I was brought around shown these little places. When you actually see how kind of tight it was, there's nowhere to go. Human beings were essentially being cordoned into this area by these heavily armed soldiers. So basically, that is the case. Now, the central to it is statements that were given by these paratroopers back in 1972 when this happened. Just kind of that evening and in the aftermath of it. And at that point, those soldiers are saying that these civilians were armed, that they were under threat, and that's why they opened fire. So they say they shot basically at them, but they have claimed that some of these young men in particular had nail bombs, or they had, guns with them. That has all been disproved. But in those statements, they admit who is there and who is in the particular sort of relevant places. So they all have letters. So I suppose central to this, we have Soldier F in the dock, and his buddy was Soldier G. And then there's Soldier H and Soldier E. Now, G and E are dead, we know. And Soldier H is one of the only paratroopers who isn't named by the others as having shot that day in these statements. But there seems to have been a lot of rounds of ammunition that left his gun at the same time, but he isn't named. Now, those statements from 1972 are key to this, and there will be an application in the court as to whether or not they can be, they're hearsay because the people aren't here to give the evidence. They were repeated, these statements, in the Widgery Tribunal, and then two of the soldiers were actually dead by the time Savile came up. But nonetheless, they're placing the individuals, and particularly F, where the prosecution sort of want him to prove that he was shooting at unarmed civilians. But they mightn't be allowed in. These witness statements may not be allowed in. He will be arguing that. And that really will be key to his defence, Soldier F. If he can get those witness statements thrown out, there probably isn't a case against him.
And that's a matter of evidence. And that's what we'll see, because this is not examining the entire event in terms of history. This is examining the actions of one person on one day, 53 years ago, and whether those actions can be proven to the point of beyond reasonable doubt. And that's the only way that Soldier F would be convicted of murder.
Yeah, if he can be placed in the relevant part of Derry where those murders occurred, and he has been placed there by these statements made in 1972 and again at the Widgery Tribunal, if that evidence isn't allowed to be used basically in the court, I don't think there's enough against him, because you don't have him there where he needs to be. And obviously Soldier H, where is he? I don't even know. I mean, definitely we know that G and E are dead, but H is, I don't know. Is he going to come and give evidence? I don't know. We didn't hear that today in the court anyway. But we sort of just got an overview of the case, and that this is going to be key to it. There will be other witnesses called, eyewitnesses who were there in the day, people who lost loved ones and who were very much in the thick of it. But definitely those statements are vital.
It's hard to imagine a more political trial. And you've seen that on the ground because you were there before the proceedings kicked off today, and I suppose that's one of the main reasons, one of the main things we can talk about today. And then when I'm sitting in the office and I see the statements coming in from the unionist parties, because for them this is a disgrace. So I mean, it is always going to be highly political. Now the judge is above that, but again, there was, we had protests outside the court today for whatever. Yeah,
I mean, look, I'm out of my lane here. I just found the opening of this really interesting, and have done some stuff on Bloody Sunday on what happened. But I feel like I'm coming at this with sort of, I'm goggle-eyed, not by the families, obviously, of the deceased, and that 2 buses, I think, came in from Derry this morning, carrying those relatives who have fought tirelessly for this day, really, and for some justice to be served. They marched or walked very peacefully from the markets area down as far as the court, and there was statements read by Ciaran Shields, who's the lawyer from Madden and Finucane, who've represented the families all the way through, and there was other statements made by relatives who've lost loved ones. So that bit is all very normal to me. I totally understand what's going on there. But then there was another little sort of portion of people who were wearing berets and dressed like soldiers, and they were sort of standing, a small group standing over to one side and not engaging. And in the aftermath of the opening, I actually went over to them and I said, do you have a point to make here? You're obviously, you're here in support of Soldier F. So yes, they were. They were very anti-media, which is very strange when you're protesting and you've got your press statements ready, but you don't particularly want to give them to somebody. I think they sort of were a bit offended that I was from Dublin for a start. But they basically said, a number of them told me that they were ex-paratroopers themselves. They were in support of Soldier F. We didn't go into a huge amount more detail on what they believe. But I've heard the stuff. I've seen the social media. So there is this argument that you can't prosecute, or certain element of the population believe, no, Soldier F should not be prosecuted, because if he is, then any soldier doing anything and anybody,
regardless of the facts.
Yeah, regardless of the facts. I mean, like the argument to me about that is so crazy when you know that there is no argument about the fact that these were unarmed civilians who were murdered essentially in cold blood. So, how can people support that? But I suppose in a wider way, you have all the politics, as you say, is going on in the background there.
Well, okay. I was going to come to that, but I'll come to it now because Gregory Campbell, the East London Derry MP, I mean, he said, he would be opposed to this because it highlights the deep unfairness of how legacy cases are being pursued, with former soldiers, elderly soldiers dragged before the courts, while terrorists responsible for countless murders continue to escape justice. And that was echoed by the TUV's Jim Allister. But as well as that, he said it is important to remember the context in Londonderry at the time. Soldiers were sent in because of escalating IRA violence, bombings and shootings that created fear and devastation across the city. Only 3 days before Bloody Sunday, 2 RUC men had been murdered by terrorists in the area of the proposed march. This was bound to create serious apprehension among soldiers being deployed. To now single out one soldier decades later while terrorists walk free is an affront to fairness.
Look, the facts were laid out today, and they have been laid out in the Savile inquiry and others. These were peaceful people, unarmed, who were shot down like they were animals. And that cannot surely be seen as, there was RUC officers had been killed, so the soldiers were, what are we saying, a bit antsy that day? They shot people in the back as they ran for their lives. They shot unarmed civilians. And 26 in total, was it? Because there was 13 dead and a lot of people with really bad injuries, really horrific injuries, bullet injuries, and people who have been, in pain to this day.
The message from the families, they said, our message is simple. Towards justice, we shall overcome. If I say, you're from Dublin. Between 1972 and 1916, it was 56 years. Between 1972 and today, it's 53 years. I mean, it's a very similar length of time. Does it surprise you, I suppose, coming in and looking at this, that this body, the relatives and the Bloody Sunday Justice Campaign has held together, is united and remains a huge political issue 53 years later?
I think it's extraordinary, the support they give one another and the dedication they have to the cause. Many of the relatives, I think, are working in that museum, and they will talk to visitors who come along and speak to them about Bloody Sunday and what happened, and they keep the story alive. I suppose 53 years seems a long, long time to us, but if you've lost your brother or, you've lost a relative, a loved one, it probably isn't. But is it not like a cold case murder? It's a little bit like a cold case. We've had some cold case murders we had one of a murder from certainly 1981. Maybe that's a little bit, 40 odd years. But it is these are murders, I suppose. There would never have been a cold case investigation into what happened on Bloody Sunday. The reason Soldier F is in the dock at all is because of the absolute tenacity of the relatives and how far they fought, against all sorts of opposition to get to this place.
We've mentioned on the Bail Tell podcast many times, and I'm sure it's come up in Crime Mulder as well, is that in theory the forces of law and order treat every case fairly. Now that's clearly a lot more complicated in this case, in the case of Bloody Sunday, because, the British Army and by association the RUC themselves were heavily implicated in what happened. So this is a case of the state investigating itself. But we speak about this often, is that unfortunately, if you want justice for your relative, the people who keep the fight up, and it must take an awful lot of energy and heartache, and keep pressure on the authorities, you're much more likely to get justice, because a file can remain at the back of that cabinet for many, many years, but a TV documentary can bring it to the front. We know that. That's just a fact.
He who shouts loudest, as they say, will get places. Yeah, it's embarrassing. I suppose it's embarrassing the political establishment and embarrassing the police that they haven't solved certain things. But I often see, and I'm sure you do too, it's the exhaustion of the people that are left behind that have to keep fighting like that. They really get emotionally drained, and they need time out sometimes from it. You know what I mean? Sometimes they can have to step away from, this campaigning for a few years, and then they might come back to it fresh and with more energy and stuff. But it takes a terrible toll on people.
And everyone has their own life. So, you want justice, and this fight is important. But I don't know if you'd agree with me, but perhaps, and I don't have personal experience, that perhaps some people find themselves in a situation where they don't want to be defined by a tragedy, be it Bloody Sunday, be it the Stardust tragedy, be it the murder of an individual. That some people, whether they want to or not, seem to move on a lot more naturally.
Yeah, but I think, in the case of Bloody Sunday, I think probably had lies not been told from the beginning, had the truth come out early on, had those, murdered souls not been branded as essentially, violent terrorists who were carrying around nail bombs and were shooting it. And really, the blame was laid with the victims, wasn't it, from the beginning? And I suppose that's really what started this campaign, that sort of sense of injustice about that. And it's kept going. Some people maybe can't, they walk away because they believe it's never going to bring their loved one back, which of course it won't. But then some people, it's almost like, it just becomes their mission in life, doesn't it, to get that justice.
Bloody Sunday at the time, I suppose, left the Irish government in 1972 in a difficult place. There have been many books written since, many podcasts and many articles as to whether they were going to somehow intervene and stuff. They weren't. But I just wonder, after all of this time, how much interest is there in this case in Dublin?
Well, I was interested enough to come up and to cover it. I'm not going to be sitting for the duration of the trial. I can't do that. But I think if there's going to be some days that are going to be interesting. I mean, this trial could go on for 8 weeks. Is there interest in Bloody Sunday? I think it's sort of definitely one of those unforgettable things that has happened in this country. And there has to be surely interest that this soldier, I was only talking to Alison last week, and I was just saying to her, what intrigues me is this guy was only 21 at the time, as were the other soldiers. What created them and made them, and what did they go on to do in their futures? Of course, we can't discuss much around that while he's on trial and when he has that anonymity. But I would find that really interesting, and I'd also find it really interesting to know if, for example, he's found guilty, does he lose his anonymity?
Well, one would presume that justice must be seen to be done.
Yeah.
And then we could find out, I suppose, what he has done for the last 53 years. But
exactly.
I have to, Jim Allister, the TUV leader, said, obviously opposes this prosecution. He's a leading barrister himself, and he says this prosecution must be seriously questioned because 3 years ago, the Public Prosecution Service abandoned the prosecution because of the fragility of the evidence, and now with the same evidence, it is now proceeding. And obviously, they're proceeding because of the court challenge from the families.
Exactly.
So
and the public prosecutor decided to take this case. I have to just give you a little bit of, so it's Louis Mabley KC is for the prosecution, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. But anyway, he, in sort of summing up the opening, said that basically that, yes, he said that these soldiers were unjustified as the civilians were not posing a threat and the use of rifles was simply essentially murder in that case. He said it's not possible to decide which soldier shot them. So in other words, they're not going to be able to prove that Soldier F had his finger on the trigger for a particular murder. But what they're saying is that each of these people was either shot by F or by one of his colleagues as he encouraged them. So they were jointly responsible. So it's a joint enterprise. the evidence, he said, showed he opened fire in those circumstances when the civilians were unarmed.
And Nicola, as you said, this could go on for up to 8 weeks. Nicola Tallant, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.